So thank you again so much for being here. If this is your first time joining us for a Diversity Abroad webinar, then welcome. My name is Trixie, and I'll be introducing myself in full really shortly. But first, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping items with respect to the GoToWebinar platform. If this is your first time using it, everybody besides the presenters are on mute. And so if you have any questions or inquiries, you have a few options. You can type your question into the question box, and you can send that to us as the presenters privately, or you can just post it for us to share. You can also raise your hand, which is a feature. If you click the little hand icon on your desktop, you can test that out now if you wanted to. That will be a great opportunity for you to just kind of engage with us as we pose questions to the audience. So we're really looking forward to going over this really important topic, especially during the summertime. I think it's a great one to explore so that we can all sort of be set up for success once the academic year kicks in. So with that, we'll get started on our webinar for how to budget and save for study abroad. So we're going to start with an agenda just to take a look at what our call will review, or what our webinar will go over. My colleague and I will introduce ourselves and tell you a little bit about our organization in case this is your first time learning about us. We'll go over some finance basics, and when we say basics, we mean like real basics, before we provide you some tips on budgeting, how to save, and how to also spend wisely once you are in country. And we'll leave some time at the end just to do a little wrap-up overview and provide some overall tips, as well as give you all time to send us some questions if you have any. So with that, again, my name is Trixie. I'm the Associate Director here at Diversity Abroad. And in this role, I work in providing insight and working on any resources that we develop directly for students. And so what that means is creating resource guides on our diversityabroad.com website, helping to administer scholarships, which we have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of scholarships, which we'll go over in a little bit. We have our student reentry conference, the Global Student Leadership Summit, and of course we have the Passport Tour. And so there are a lot of different ways that we try to engage with students, both in a virtual space and in person. And I do that alongside my colleague, Deneen, who will be co-presenting with me, and she will also take a few minutes to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. This is Deneen Johnson. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for Diversity Abroad. The bulk of my job is coordinating our national outreach called the Passport Tour, where we visit several campuses throughout the fall and spring term. Last year, we visited over 40 campuses and got in touch with 2,000 plus students. So it's a large outreach initiative. In addition to that, I do some content developing. So whether it's creating resources that are beneficial for students as they get ready to study abroad or they travel abroad, that's part of my role here at Diversity Abroad as well. Then also I coordinate our social media efforts. So if you haven't liked us already on social media, be sure to do that.
Excellent. Thanks, Deneen. So you'll be hearing from Deneen shortly or throughout the webinar as well. That is us, and we're going to just tell you a little bit more about Diversity Abroad. Can you all raise your hand if this is your first Diversity Abroad anything? If you're just not familiar with us or what we do. Okay, so a couple of people. Excellent. That's good to know. You can go ahead and put your hands down rather. Diversity Abroad, who we are and what we do. We are about 10 years old. I think we're going into our 11th year officially. And we're an organization that really just is dedicated. We're sort of like the leading organization in international education, dedicated to diversity and inclusion efforts in study abroad, And so what that means is we have resources, as we mentioned previously, that support students from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. How we define diversity and what is underrepresented varies, of course, from institution to institution. But generally speaking, we have a lot of resources on our website that help to support those students who may not traditionally go overseas, or who may not even go into the study abroad office, whether they have one or not, to learn more information, right? And so we do that through expert guides, country guides. We write articles. We have program listings, of course, so students can just get a sense of the breadth of programs that we offer. We offer scholarships as well. And so we're not a provider. We really don't send students abroad ourselves directly. And we consider ourselves more of an information sharing organization. In addition to our student resources, we also have a professional network. It's called the Diversity Abroad Network. And it's a consortium of over 200 institutions, providers, nonprofit organizations, government organizations that are all committed to developing more inclusive practices so that we can all, in our professional careers, support students who have specific and unique needs when going overseas. So sort of the Cliff Notes version of our organization. But of course, you're welcome to contact us if you have any other questions, and we'll have our contact information available to you at the end of this webinar. So now that we are jumping into the nitty gritty of our webinar on how to budget and save, we're just going to start with a little overview and some basics about what we mean when we say budget and what we mean when we say saving. One disclaimer we'd like to give out is that, of course, we are by no means financial advisors. We're not professionals in financing. In fact, I probably can learn in my personal life from the same content that we're delivering today. So just keep that in mind. You know, we are here first and foremost just to help you as students, or even if you're professionals tuning in, to know how beneficial it can be to budget and to save with respect to making study abroad a reality. So if you have mentors or other family and friends who are in your life that can give you more personal advice, obviously we encourage you to go ahead and do so. So with that, we're going to get started. So what is a budget? I'm sure this is kind of basics, and that's exactly what we were going for. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to define budget in two ways. Number one is a plan for coordinating resources and expenses. So for example, saying, I'm going to develop a budget to save money for studying abroad, which is hopefully what you are here listening in order to do, or that you're trying to do rather. And it's also the amount of money made available. So when you say you're going to budget a certain amount for a trip, for example, I will budget $2,000 for spending in London. You can use the term in both ways, but it's just this really helpful tool to help you with spending wisely. And we're going to go into a little bit about why it is important. So why are budgets important? Hopefully you all have some ideas. So these are just a few of the reasons that we think budgeting is really important. Of course, it helps you to see your spending patterns. So if you see that you are spending an overwhelming amount of money going out to eat, maybe that can keep you help you to understand why you should take a few days to instead, eat at home or make meals at home or go on have potlucks with friends, right? It helps us to see how and what we spend our money on or for, and so that we can make better decisions. It ensures that we always have funds available for what we consider to be important things in our life. And of course, it just kind of helps you to establish a healthy habit of spending. Now, of course, we're going over this to know that some listeners here, maybe some of you have been budgeting. How about this? Can you raise your hand if you budget in your personal life? Is that something that everyone here is doing, or is that nothing? Okay, a couple people do it, but it looks like the majority are like me and do not. Excellent. Okay, so this is, it's one of those like time old tales or tale old times or whatever you call it. Budgeting is important, and it's something we should all try and do, right? So this next visual is really just a chance for you to think at a very, very elementary level about money that comes in and money that goes out. So Deneen, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So if we just think about this with respect to our own incomes or money that's coming in and what we're spending, trying to create this even balance. Obviously, some of us have credit cards, or we've taken out loans for some really big purchases, and that's totally reasonable money for education, for example, right? And that's just inevitable as I said. So a good general rule of thumb, however, is spending what you make. And I think that if we keep that in mind with respect to studying abroad or saving for studying abroad, or once you're in country and you're overseas, it can really help you to stay sort of on task with what the budgets that you set for yourself. So with that, what do we mean when we say save, right? Saving we define in three ways: A, to put money aside; B, to avoid unnecessary waste or expense; and to C, to spend less money. There's obviously many iterations of what this might look like. I think I speak for myself, at least. I kind of grew up budget savvy. Some might say cheap, some might say frugal. But saving, I think, is just a good practice in general, so that you can really, again, make sure that you save. You have money for some of those bigger expenses that you do want to have in your life. So hopefully it goes without saying that saving is important. But why is saving important, I think, is a good next topic to explore. So saving is important. Why? Because it ensures that you can spend your money on what's important, right? Again, we mentioned maybe it's your investment in your education. Maybe you'd like to buy a home. Maybe you are taking care of your family, and that's what's important to you. And so saving will make sure that besides the necessities in life, you have a bucket that kind of ensures that you can spend on some of those bigger purchases in the future. And again, same as budgeting, right? It helps you to establish healthy spending habits to set you up for long-term success. So unlike our friend Arthur here, hopefully we don't slip too much and go spending too unnecessarily and too frequently. So this is just a chance for you all to interact with us. Again, this is an interactive tool. You can go ahead and type if you're interested about why you want to save money. What are some of those big purchases? And hopefully, if you're tuning in, studying abroad is one of those big purchases that you're hoping to save up for. So with that, I'll wait to see if anyone has any responses, if they have things that they want to share. But we'll go ahead and move forward with the presentation in case anybody else has other questions about that. So with respect to preparing to study abroad, what are some budgeting and or saving things that we can talk about or we can consider? So with starting, we always say, have the conversation with friends and family. Friends and family are the ones who may see a shift actually in your lifestyle, right? So maybe you guys used to go out every weekend and eat out all the time. And so if you're really intentional about making study abroad happen, maybe you decide to just do one day less where you go out and eat, right? Or you develop this new pattern where you start changing the frequency with which you spend on unnecessary expenses so that you can start to plan for studying abroad. Family and friends can be one of the biggest either champions for supporting students in studying abroad, but also one of the biggest barriers to having students study abroad, right? If we don't have the support of our friends and families who encourage us who see the benefit of that for our personal or professional growth, it's really hard to make those changes to your lifestyle every day that really add up to saving for this opportunity. So take the time to have that conversation and to get people on your, on your side that really support your decisions and your changes. Of course, meet with a financial aid advisor. So understanding what of your financial aid package, if you have one, what of those funds are eligible and can be used towards a study abroad. So this rule really changes from institution to institution. There isn't one common rule. So if you are listening, make sure you make that appointment. Maybe the office is a lot less busy now than it usually is in the academic year. So this is a good time, I think, to really take advantage of that and just say, is there a general rule? Are some grants eligible versus others? Or sort of what are my options? This can help you also know that if there is a backup plan in case you don't get some scholarships that you apply for, what are some financial aid options that exist? As I just mentioned, researching scholarships and deadlines and putting in the work. And when I say putting in the work, I mean, as a scholarship provider, We can tell when students have submitted an application that either they started that day or maybe they just didn't spend a lot of time thinking through the responses in their essays. So really spend this summer to research some of those scholarships that are huge, have lots of funding. We'll name a few of them in a little bit. And really take the time now to do your due diligence to see what it will take to have a successful application. And then last, we say be open to cost-effective study abroad options. So there may be somebody who's listening right now who has always wanted to study in Japan, and that's been your dream, and you're going to do whatever it takes to study abroad there. And that's okay. But there might also be students who are listening that are just open to anywhere. Take me somewhere. It doesn't matter where, just something new, right? So if you're in that ladder, you might have a little bit of flexibility. And there are a few reasons why. If you choose what we consider a non-traditional location in studying abroad, there might be a few benefits to that. Number one, there might be a lower cost of living. So an example is that I did an internship as a graduate student in Cambodia. And Cambodia, the dollar exchange there is greatly in your favor. I would say I was able to get breakfast, lunch, and dinner for $5, and that's not an exaggeration. So there are certainly some locations where, if you are really concerned about how you would spend money or how much you might spend while you're overseas, take that into consideration. And also, in some ways, it does increase the chances of you getting scholarships. And I don't say that in any official measure, but what I can say is if a scholarship, if we have 5 scholarships to give away, we are not going to choose 5 students all going to London or 5 students all going to Europe for that matter, right? We want to see some location diversity. Obviously, you need to still meet the criteria of the scholarship and be a standout applicant, and all of that is important. But it is great to see that students are challenging themselves to go to these other destinations. So I'm sure some other scholarships may have similar ideas as well. And of course, the other cost-effective study abroad option I want to point out are exchange programs. If you're not familiar with exchange programs, or maybe your school doesn't have one, I would say just contact your study abroad office to see if this is even a viable option. Exchange programs are essentially you switching places with another student at a partnered institution. So you would pay what you already pay, and they take your place, and then they pay what they already pay, and you take their place. So it may not seem like as much of a sticker shock because it would essentially be the same as paying to stay at your school, but you get to be in a different location. So kind of based on where you're interested in going, that might be something that you can look into, and hey, it might be even cheaper than where you're living at school right now. So, and it looks like a couple people were talking a little bit about saving to study abroad and travel in general, which is good to know. So, budgeting tips that we have in order to kind of get that started. So now that you've considered what it means to budget, what it means to save, now you're thinking about you want to study abroad. How do you get started on that? So the first thing we recommend is to research study abroad costs. That might vary based on the program, or that will definitely vary rather, based on the program, the country, the semester, the school you're at. There's all kinds of variables that factor in. So as you prepare, once you decide on a location or maybe even a program, research how much that's going to cost, and also keep track of where your funding may come from. So if you recall that balance, right, of income and expenses, there's what it would cost you to do something, but also where that money might potentially come from. And so not just the cost on the program itself, we're not really quite there yet, but it's more like the cost of even getting there, right? How much are the tuitions? How much are the flights? Do you have housing options where you can choose to do something that's more cost effective? Or do you have to do something specific? All of those are variables depending on the program you choose, right? How much are you going to have or save for sort of like unexpected or unnecessary expenses, right? So the aforementioned expenses, tuitions, flights, housing, transportation, meals, those are all the things that you need to have. The rest, excursions, souvenirs, having an emergency fund. Those are things that you should have money for just in case something comes up. So is that going to be an option for you? Will you have that money? And then, of course, talking to study abroad advisors and the financial aid office, who are constantly in regular communication to ensure that you are applying for a program that is within your budgetary constraints, and then working with you to find where those income sources can come from. If you can see here, we have a budgeting handout that might help you with that. It's under handouts. So you can go ahead. That's an Excel spreadsheet that you can click to download, and you can kind of like fill in some of those blanks. There are some really great really great resources that exist beyond just this one, of course. So maybe your school already has one, but we have one attached as well, just for your convenience. So our second tip for budgeting is to just avoid overspending. This is a great general rule of thumb, but when you create a budget for yourself, you can see much more quickly how you spend or where you spend your money. So having online or mobile apps, like I use mint.com, which every swipe of the card, it tracks what I'm spending and kind of categorizes based on categories I set forth. And it really allows me to see like, wow, I'm eating out a lot more, or, oh, I'm spending a lot on concerts, or I'm shopping too much. And this is a huge spending month versus last month, right? So something like that can really help you develop, again, good spending and healthy spending practices, but also having an accountability buddy. Kind of like the same when you're working out. You have to have somebody that kind of checks you and makes sure that they're supporting you in your efforts to save or to budget or to plan. And maybe there's somebody in your life who you can partner with, and you can establish that accountability among each other to make sure that you don't spend more than you would want to spend, right? So yeah, that is some of our tips for overspending. Somebody said, where is the sheet to download? So on your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a section that should say handouts, and under handouts, it says 1 of 5. You should be able to click on that blue, for me, it's blue text, and it says Diversity Abroad, Study Abroad Budget Worksheet. So just click on that and you should be able to download it. And hopefully that's it. Yeah. Mackenzie asked, could you repeat the name of that website? I'm not sure which website. Mint.com, maybe? Is that what you're referring to, Mackenzie? Mint.com is a free website that is available for anyone to join. You just kind of link it to your accounts, whether it's like your bank account or your credit card, and it just kind of tracks your spending. So if that wasn't it, just let me know. But that was it. Okay, perfect. Excellent. So yeah, you can see it here, mint or everydollar.com. All right, moving on. So when we say find alternative funding resources, these are just ways to get creative, to find how you can get money coming in and funding to support you that you can hopefully plan to then save, right? Never hurts to get a job. Depending on your status, if you are a student, maybe you are eligible for work study. If not, getting a job, like a side hustle, something that helps to get more income coming in, selling unused clothes or furniture or other items. If you are moving in or out of the student dorms, or if somebody is coming in or roommates are coming out, there's always something that you're not using that can be sold, right? Market your skills. So maybe you are somebody that likes to bake. Maybe you can give guitar lessons. Maybe you can be a tutor on campus, or for a private tutor rather. There are all kinds of ways to kind of work within the skill set that you already possess and just make a little money on the side. Certainly something that we would suggest, maybe you can sell something that you make, right? Setting up a donation page, or going old school, as we like to say, and asking for funding support. It never hurts. I know I did old school letter writing for my internship that I previously mentioned, and got a lot more than I was expecting. So that's always an option. And then, of course, scholarships, for which we have a whole separate slide. So Of course, if you go to our website, diversityabroad.com, we have a whole bunch there, but a couple that we'll put up that you should have on your radar. The Gilman Scholarship it's a state funded scholarship, and it's for students who are eligible or receive the Pell Grant, which is something that hopefully within your financial aid package you are aware of, or that you know that you have. So the Gilman can award students, up to $5,000 towards a study abroad, specifically for students who exhibit high financial need. FEA stands for Fund for Education Abroad. They have tons of scholarships for students who are from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. Of course, at Diversity Abroad, as I mentioned, we have a ton of scholarships. None are open at the moment because it's the summer, but they will all open at the end of summer. And we have scholarships that we make available to students. Some that are open to anyone going on any program. So that's, for example, our Overseas Ambassador Scholarship. But we also have scholarships in partnership with some providers. So Semester at Sea, AIFS, the China Institute, FIE, and a few others. So quite a few options that are available. And you're welcome to ask me questions, and I'll be sure to answer those at the end of the webinar. You can always look up State Department funds, other identity-based funds, and just some general tips. Make sure you take note of due dates. If you can, collect with people who have received that scholarship. We have an alumni section on our website called of alumni stories, and you can kind of scroll through that. Some students have mentioned whether or not they receive certain scholarships, and then work with a study abroad office or a writing coach or a mentor to, again, write excellent essays so that we can read through the quality of your essays that you really, really want this award. So those are just some of our tips that we have for finding some of those extra funds. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Deneen, who will talk to you a little bit about saving.
Okay, so we just heard a great overview of budgeting for your study abroad experience. And typically the words budgeting and savings, in my opinion, go together because you always want to budget for savings as well as some of your expenses. But for this particular webinar, we are talking about saving, particularly for study abroad. So what are some of your favorite saving tips? So if you've heard, and just in general, in your own personal life, or if they relate to studying abroad. So if you have some saving tips, I would love to share those with the rest of the group. You can feel free to type those in the question box. And Trixie, if you see them before I do, definitely let me know as we continue on with the webinar, because we would like to, this is a community, Diversity Abroad is a community, and we would like to share some of the tips. So as I'm talking, if you have some really excellent saving tips, go ahead and write those in the question box so we can share with everyone. And thank you, Trixie, for that.
Sure.
So saving for study abroad, we just mentioned talking about different apps to use in order to budget. Well, there's also apps available for you to use to save. So I know for me personally, if I don't automate my savings, I completely forget to save, which sounds terrible, but it's the reality. A lot of us are really, really busy and we want to save, but if something does it for us automatically, it would be fantastic. So you can use saving apps such as Digit, and I believe Capital is another one I've heard about. If you've heard of another one, again, you can list it in the question box. I do want to give a disclaimer that Digit is now charging, so it's like $2.99 a month. So I know that is an expense that you would probably have to budget in if you do decide to use Digit. But if you find that the benefits outweigh the expense, it may be a good option for you. I know I use Digit personally, and it's really, really helpful for me because, again, I forget to save. So again, automating what's important, and what's important to you is one, studying abroad, and how to get there. You'll need to save in order to have the funds to study abroad and enjoy that experience. Another one that is very popular is a GoFundMe or any other kind of crowd funding opportunities or online fundraising. And I do want to clarify, just because I have visited some students and told them about GoFundMe, and they thought that GoFundMes were only for maybe sad events or events in the community where they need funding and money. But GoFundMe's don't necessarily have to be just for that. There are a lot of students who create GoFundMe's for their study abroad experience or any kind of global education experience. And because it is all online, it's easy for you to create, to have that link that you can then share on social media platforms. You can send family and friends all around the country and or the world. So it's just that easy accessibility. You can send it to maybe a parent or guardian, and they would be able to share it with their colleagues at work. It's just the easy access of having that online link where individuals will be able to donate to your study abroad fund. So if you propose it as a way as somebody else is investing into your education, those are really key words that you can use that cause people to want to donate to you. So investing in your education, it would be it'd be a good opportunity for you to have that GoFundMe. Again, disclaimer, GoFundMe's do, I think there is a portion of the proceeds that they use for like administrative fees, but keep that in mind when you're also budgeting how much will be reduced from that as well. And then the third tip for savings is really more or less about being self-reliant. So the number one thing, let's say, with eating out less, we've gone into a culture where eating out is very convenient and it's very popular, but maybe you'll have to reduce how many times you go to Starbucks, or I really like tea, so I have to reduce going to tea shops, or whether it's eating out with friends, which I also really, really thoroughly enjoy to do. But maybe instead of eating out multiple days a week, you reduce that and invite friends over and have like a potluck. Or maybe it's you completely scratch out eating out. Or consider maybe instead of going out to dinner, maybe you'll go out to lunch, or you'll only order an appetizer. So being really creative about like eating out. But other self-reliant tasks, is there a way, maybe for example, I know this is kind of a stretch, but instead of going somewhere to get your car washed, maybe you'll wash it yourself. Or just little tasks and things that you outsource that you can do by yourself. So maybe instead of having Spotify Premium, you'll just have Spotify regular and you'll listen to the commercials. But just any ways that you can kind of cut out costs temporarily so that every dollar really does add up. So think about ways that you can do things yourself and instead of maybe outsourcing just for a little bit. And the fourth one, which seems really obvious, is creating a savings account. So you may have a savings account right now just for things that you're planning in the future. Maybe you're wanting to buy a car. Maybe you're saving for another big purchase. But having a savings account, again, specifically for your study abroad experience, helps you know how much money you have, again, saved towards that experience. So if you're on a college or university campus, there may be a partner bank that you can easily open up a student savings account. And you can ask about student discounts, because sometimes banks like to charge to open an account, or you need to have a minimum deposit. But for students, they can be a bit more lenient. So ask about that. And then maybe ask about promotions. So say I am a student, is there a promotional special that you have for me? Whether it's if I refer a friend, I get $25 or something like that. I was actually looking at a bank website a couple of days ago, and they had promotions such as that. So kind of do your research, see what are some opportunities for you, and take advantage of the fact that you are a student and there are discounts available for you even when opening up savings accounts. And the last tip is mason jars for travel. So whether you create an envelope system or you create little jars, like maybe one jar is like, maybe you still need your passport. So a passport jar, a jar for Australia, a jar for an excursion while you're abroad. So something that you can visibly see that you are actually saving. Sometimes that's really encouraging. I myself need to hide my money from myself, but other people need to see that they are really tracking away at a goal. So either one that works for you, or maybe even both, would be beneficial. So did anybody have any tips for saving for study abroad, Trixie?
None that came in, no.
Okay. So now we talked about budgeting before your study abroad trip. And then we talked about saving before. So now you have taken all of our tips Trixie and I have given you, and you have budgeted, you saved all the money, you have all the money you need, you're excited, you're on your plane, you're flying across the great seas, and you're in your location for study abroad. So here is some budgeting and saving advice while you're in country. So what we don't want to happen is that you do all this hard work, you get the money that you need to be able to go abroad, and then you completely blow your budget and your savings while you're there. Again, the budget is a plan. So you are creating a spending plan, and our goal is for you to absolutely stick to that plan. So here's some tips and advice for that. So number one, again, avoiding overspending while abroad is sticking to your budget. Again, we're just reiterating points that we talked about before. You create the budget, you got to stick to it. And especially while you're in country and you may have peers who want to go out to eat or do something additional. Again, you have your budget and your goal is to stick to it. And it's not there as a hindrance to you, it's so that you won't overspend. And have some faith in yourself. If this is your first time sticking to a budget, we know you can do it. We have faith in you, trust yourself, and know that this is a plan for you to help so that you don't run out of money in the first couple of weeks. So go back to reviewing that phone app that tracks your expenses. So Mint.com, the great thing about that is they also have, I believe there's an app on your phone too, where you can also check your expenses. And if you're nowhere near Wi-Fi or you only have access to Wi-Fi limitedly, you just make it a point, maybe every Sunday, you'll check your budget and see if you're on track that week. And that would be a good opportunity for you to see if you're staying in your budget plan or if you overspent and how you can adjust your budget for that upcoming week. Again, check in with that accountability buddy. Trixie mentioned having an accountability buddy. Once you find one, set up a time with them so that they know, like, hey, this is my spending plan. Can you help me when we're going out on excursions to not do some impulse buying? I just need somebody else to bounce ideas off of and just make sure that I'm not overspending unnecessarily. And then the fourth one is using cash. This may work for some people, maybe not for others, but keeping in mind something tangibly in your hand. Once that money runs out, then you can't spend. So whether it is, as a group, your study abroad peers and yourself, you're going out to dinner and you budgeted only maybe $20, however that converts into another currency. And so once that $20 is gone, you can't spend anymore. It helps you keep in track. And keep in mind, there are certain locations where, here in the States, that you can get a refill on a drink or soda or water for free at restaurants. That may not be the case in some places that you're going. So keep in mind when you are budgeting, there may be some cultural differences depending on where you're going, especially even things like food. So number 5, be selective about excursions and spending. Again, if it is the weekend and there's an opportunity to go on an excursion, you may ask yourself, okay, I would love to go to this place, but maybe instead of staying in this really nice hotel or something, maybe you're going to stay in a nicer hostel. So just being selective about that. And then also, if you wanted to attend a museum in your location that you're in, maybe instead of going on the weekends, you'll go on the weekdays where it might be a little bit less crowded and cheaper as well. And then when you're at these museums or places around town, they may have student discounts, and then ask the locals where they go, because maybe some of their locations for restaurants or fun activities is cheaper, or in some cases could be free, whether you use not Mint.com or Meetup, and maybe go to a cultural event for free instead of spending money doing something else. And then number 6, which is really important, is treat yourself for sticking to the budget. I know this is kind of difficult to think, I have to budget, I have to plan, I have to stick to it. But you've done all this hard work to study abroad. It's okay sometimes to treat yourself, but it is important to even write that into your budget. So maybe you ask yourself, you'll allot maybe $50 to $100, whatever the case may be, for a treat yourself. Maybe that's a bit much for you, depending on what country you're in. But even budgeting self-care or something really fun into your budget is always important. And that way, when you do splurge, it's still written into your budget. So it's not something that you're concerned about later on. So underspending, which actually may happen a little less than other times. But I like this quote here that says, travel is the only thing you buy that makes you richer. So for students this is specifically for students who may come from backgrounds where money is a concern, or maybe from low income students where having to budget out a lot of money or spending, as the example said earlier, $2,000 in London seems like a lot of money. So almost having this fear of spending it. Well, keep in mind, you did have a budget and you did do your hard work to be able to go abroad. And so if you have the means and the money, don't have the fear to spend it because you did all the hard work to save the money. I would say go ahead and spend it even within your means. Sometimes it's hard to think about, oh, $2,000 in London, what am I going to do with that? That's a lot of money to spend when you're thinking about people back home. But keep in mind, you've had this experience and it is an investment into your happiness and your wellness, even while you're there abroad. So don't feel bad about spending that money that someone has given to you or gifted to you or gave to you for your education. And so again, this may not apply to everyone, but keep in mind there may be students on your trip that this applies to as well. So if there is a student who is a little bit hesitant about going out to eat often or going to certain events, or they tell you they only have a certain amount of money, just be aware of that, be cognizant of it, and be respectful. But also keep in mind, maybe asking them, do you have a budget? Do you have a plan? I want to make sure that you enjoy the trip as well. But again, underspending is not something that happens too often. But it is something that we just want to discuss in this webinar, just to make sure everybody is included again in the conversation. And spending while you're in country. So again, some countries you may have to haggle or negotiate prices where that may not be the case here in the States. Other countries it is to be expected, especially if you go to markets, whether it's food or maybe some things that you pick up as gifts for people who donated through your GoFundMe. You may have to haggle that. So maybe they have a certain prices for bracelets and you say, oh, I'll give you 3, 4 X amount of dollars. Again, you can always find YouTube videos about how to haggle or negotiate or articles as well. Just being, again, respectful of the culture. There's no need to be rude, but be respectful in the haggling or the negotiation process, so that you're not paying full price when that is not even expected. And then understanding the currency and the currency exchange and the currency rates. Have maybe even a cheat sheet in your phone. I had to do that when I went to Costa Rica to understand how many colones was $1. And so that I have it quickly in my mind that I can calculate how much, so that I'm not overspending, 1, and 2, that maybe I won't get unintentionally maybe ripped off. So understanding currency is important. Researching your debit and credit card fees and ATM locations. I know before I went abroad, I had to, again, call my bank and let them know that I'm going abroad. They informed me of certain ATM locations where if I were to withdraw cash, it would actually be cheaper at certain ATMs or certain banks than others. So that's really important to keep in mind. Thinking about every time I took out cash, it cost me, I think, like $5. So that's something else I had to budget in, in addition to the exchange and currency rate. And then number 4, we talked about a little bit earlier, looking for student discounts at museums, for travel, maybe even at hostel or low budget stays for excursions later on. And again, planning for your excursions in advance will help you get the best deal and do the best research while you are in country. And again, these are only a few of the items that we can discuss. I'm sure we can talk about this for quite a while, but these are just some highlights. And again, if you wanted to share, then you can write that in the question box. But again, this is not an exhaustive list of all the ways that you can save on spending while in country. Depending on the country you're going to, there may be additional tips. So do your research on that just to make sure that you are maximizing your money, or you're getting the most out of your experience and also the most out of your money while you're abroad. So now that we have talked about what a budget is, finding some basics, talked about a budget, talked about funding sources such as scholarships, saving beforehand, and also not overspending while in country, we're going to talk about a few next steps, which are just highlighting again what we discussed. So from this webinar, you have been able to understand what a budget is and why it's important in your overall personal personal life, but why it's especially important when pursuing a study abroad or global education experience. Number 2 of our top 5 tips is avoid overspending. Avoid overspending before you go abroad, and especially while you're in country. Again, just reducing some of your costs beforehand gives you more savings, and then making sure that you stick to your budget while you're in country allows you to have the money that you need to do what you've planned on your budget sheet. Number 3 of our top 5 tips is where's the money? Finding funding resources. So we talked about GoFundMe. We talked about maybe selling some items that you don't need. Talked about utilizing your skills to create money here and there. It could be that you're an Uber driver for a little bit, or Lyft. So being creative about the time that you have and how you can utilize that time to create funding. And of course, scholarships. You can go on diversityabroad.com. You can also go to the scholarship pages that we listed before. And number 4, create a savings plan. The same way as you had a budgeting plan, you probably want to have a savings one too. And whether that savings is creating a student account where you automatically deposit money into that account every month or every week, or having an online app such as Digit or Capital so that you can automate your savings. And last but not least, what we just talked about, spending while in country. And what we want to do is encourage you to do some more research to see if there's any tips and tricks specifically for your country that'll allow you to save some money, whether it's haggling for prices at the market, or whether it's not ordering that extra soda at dinner because it actually costs money. There's just different ways where you can adjust your spending while in country. So with that, I hope you have gathered quite a bit from our webinar today. We're going to give you a couple minutes to type out your questions if you have any additional questions for us. Keep in mind that handout is still available for you to download. Feel free to download it and share it with your peers. This will help you and that accountability buddy that we want you to have both be on the same page with this handout. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the box below. And while we have questions that are coming in, just a quick reminder to connect with us on all of the social media platforms, in addition to joining our online community at diversityabroad.com. We're going to give it another minute to gather some questions. Great.
Yeah, one said, I have aged out of many student discounts. Are there any travel suggestions? I might mention a couple. I know a couple of friends use things like couch surfing, which is kind of like Airbnb, but for free. And I don't think that there is an age limit to that. But that could just be a great option if you are comfortable with staying in people's homes. If that's not something that kind of worries you, I think that's a great alternative for funding, and that a lot of people do. So it's called couch surfing or couch surf. And again, I don't think there's an age limit. Other just kind of ways to look for discounts. I know Denise mentioned, if you want to go to museums or if you like to see certain exhibits, do some homework to see if there are some days of the week where access is free. So sometimes some museums will say like, every Sunday from 11 to 4, where it's free on the first Sunday of the month or something random like that. So little things like that might help. But there's also always, festivals and fun things that might just be happening that are unique to the time and place where you're staying. And that's always something that is free to at least be part of, but maybe, buying certain things, obviously, or food or other souvenirs would cost. But I think that's another great thing. And the last suggestion I'll have is sometimes traveling, you can be, there's different kinds of travelers. If you are a student and you're studying abroad, I think if you're there for a few weeks to a few months, one of the more memorable things you can do is maybe not traveling to every single tourist site. But sometimes it's just doing things that locals would do, right? So I think trying to shift your thinking and focus more on the experience of being there rather than having things that you can sort of like check off on your bucket list, if that makes sense. You can kind of do a little of both. So if you're in Paris, for example, maybe it's just like picnicking in front of the Eiffel Tower. That's kind of like a cute thing you wouldn't be able to do anywhere else, and it would be more cost efficient. I don't know, Janine, do you have any other suggestions? Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, now I've kind of aged out of study abroad too, unless I go back to get a PhD or something. But so I totally understand. I would say if you're considering non-educational travel, things like Groupon would be beneficial. And there's always a coupon for Groupons. That's additional discounts. And then there are websites um, such as like, I think it's like Join Honey, which is like, for example, coupons on certain purchases that you make online. And sometimes those include travel purchases. So doing some research on, and these are like legitimate websites, not like crazy ones, but doing some research on discounted travel and then see if there's any coupons specifically for that. And then also being okay with traveling. I think Trixie said something similar, maybe when it's off season. So I went to Costa Rica right at the end of wet season. So maybe I think it rained like 2 days out of the 5 days I was there. And I was completely fine with that. So that may be some tips. And then it was cheaper as well. That was cheaper. And some of the excursions were cheaper just because it was during a season that's not as popular. So hopefully those couple of tips help you out.
Excellent. Thanks, Deneen. The second question that has come in, what popular study abroad locations have you found have the lowest currency exchange rate? That's a good question. I think to kind of answer your question, but to leave it open, I would suggest if you are planning to study abroad through your school or through programs provided in partnership through your school, through like third-party providers, just try to gauge all of the different destinations that are available to you realistically. And then from that list, kind of do a little bit of homework. I just think it's smarter to maybe see what is actually an option versus getting yourself excited about a location, then realizing that you can't actually go on a program through that country. So I would say generally, I know Southeast Asia, like I said, I was in Cambodia. Southeast Asia can be very cost effective. Many places in South America and the Caribbean. And that's a little bit about just from what I know of the exchange rate. But those are also things that you can look up fairly easily online or talk to somebody in the study abroad office about. Obviously, places in Europe can be more expensive for American students, especially the UK or England, with the British pound being less cost efficient for Americans. So yeah, I might just say that. Any other things that you wanted to add to that, Deneen?
I would say also don't assume that one country is more expensive than the other. Like, again, do your research. Because that happened to me recently where I was like, oh, I'm not going to go to XYZ country because they're more expensive. And then I talked to a friend and then, are you sure? Are you sure? Have you compared the exchange rates? Have you compared, again, seasons the which you would go? And then I found out they were pretty equally or comparable to each other. So same as Trixie mentioned, again, reaching out to your institution because they may even have really large scholarships for the places you're going. So then you would only have to fundraise for some of your spending money. So again, don't completely rule out locations that you would love to go to. But we were just saying one of our budgeting hacks and tips is to consider locations that are less expensive as well. But again, you could get a scholarship to one place and be completely okay.
So. Excellent. So I just want to be cognizant of time. It's almost 12, but we do have a few more questions. So if you have to log off, thank you for joining us. And we'll make sure to put our contact information up. And then Deneen and I will answer the last few questions for those of you that can remain to stay. Somebody asks, like, what about air travel for aged out students? I think there are a couple of ways that you can set up, alerts on your phone or through social media to look at when prices are either super discounted, and again, they're traditionally sort of like off season, and or sometimes there are error fares. So sometimes airlines accidentally post the wrong price for something, and then a bunch of people go and pay this lower cost, and that has happened to me once. So it's just it kind of is a coincidence if you're looking for that. But I don't know that there's any one other trick beyond that. One other suggestion I might just have is, if you think you're going to be a frequent traveler, having a credit card where you can get miles, it can really help to offset those costs. So once you continue to travel, and you can kind of continue to save, but that's kind of like the trap, right? So it kind of goes against the idea of like saving, but that's just another way to help cut back costs for travel. And there's another question: how do you make sure that saving becomes a habit? That's a good question. I think I will just say, again, having people that are accountable to you really helps. I think a lot of financial literacy also can be in some ways cultural, right? Either we grew up having families that really enforce that, or we didn't. And I think getting into the new habit of having that, if that's not something you already do, it will take time. But I think having friends and family to hold you accountable, to support you through that, I think is probably the best advice we can give. I don't know, Deneen, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Trixie, but anything that we do repeatedly becomes a habit. So just knowing that again, I like the idea of accountability, but being determined. For example, I want to get up every day and work out. That has yet to happen because I'm really not as determined to do it. So I would say, if your goal is to ensure that you're staying on your budget, maybe you make a reminder on your phone so that when you wake up, you see that, okay, check your budget today, or maybe once a week on a Monday. So something that kind of reminds you. Again, accountability is great, but also mentally know that you can do something, and that your goal is to push yourself to do that. Just keep in mind that there's a lot of people not pushing themselves to achieve some of their goals, but you don't want to be one of those people, because we have some faith in you. So just be determined to do it, and then tell somebody else so that you're accountable to do that, and then set reminders for yourself. Even when you're tired, even when you're discouraged, continue to push through. And then, after, I think it takes a month or two to create an actual habit.
Yeah, 28 days, I think, is the official number.
Yeah. And there's a book on that. It's called The Power of Habit, and how it talks about building a habit. But so yeah, just being determined to do that, create some reminders for yourself would be beneficial.
Thanks, Deneen. And then the last question before we wrap up: do you all have some personal tips that you have implemented that make a great change? That's a good question. I don't know if I'm very good at budgeting myself. I have mint.com. I mean, and it's jarring. But I think, in the same way, Deneen was talking about exercise, right? In the same way that nutritionists might tell you, like, if you're really trying to change your eating habits, spend a day kind of like writing down what you eat, and then do that for a few days, and you kind of get shocked into the things you put into your body. I think in the same way, you might do the same with your spending. Like, spend a week, if you can, tracking everything that you spend money on. And I think you'll find you really didn't anticipate the spending patterns that you have. So I think just, if you get in the habit of that, I'm not very good at budgeting in my personal everyday life, but when I travel, I'm writing every single expense down, because the last thing I want is knowing I took out $200 and I had no idea where it went. And so that's something I really try to exercise, and at the very least, I'm really good about it when I go overseas. So that might be something that I would, at the very least, encourage you to do. Deneen, do you have any other tips?
Yeah, I actually, this year, one of my goals at the beginning of the year, some people make resolutions, some people make vision goals. One of my goals was to work on finances. So I looked at some free events in the community to see that talk about finances, and some banks actually host workshops about financing and retiring and things you're saving for. So consider going to a free workshop, or there's also free online workshops. But I went to a free workshop hosted by a community organization, and it was specifically for young professionals. and the financial planner was giving out a giveaway of a free financial planning session, and I won it, which is fantastic. So being able to talk to somebody else that's completely disconnected from my situation, to be able to talk about planning, spending, and funding is also beneficial. And there may be some free opportunities, even sometimes at the library. They bring in financial planners or people for free. So just check, your local community and what are some options for you. And then when you do have conversations with people about accountability, factor in things like educational travel, or education just in general, and have that budgeted and automated just as your savings would. So those would be my suggestions. And then my accountability buddies really are just some really close friends who are very like-minded. And the good thing about these friends is the majority of them also studied abroad. So we have this global mindset of wanting to travel again. So we keep each other accountable and say, hey, I have a group of friends who are going to South Korea. Unfortunately, I couldn't go this time. That's fine. I'll catch them again when they're in Africa next year. So it's okay to potentially decline one offer so that you can have the money saved up for another opportunity. So whether that's traveling or maybe you want to go on multiple study abroad trips. So those are my tips for you.
Thanks, Deneen. And thank you all for your questions and for participating in today's webinar. Again, if you've RSVP'd, which you obviously have, you'll be receiving a recording of this session. So with that, you have our contact details. Feel free to reach out if you have any other follow-up questions. And thank you again for being here.